Hello, everybody, and welcome. As we all know, the Russia Ukraine war has had a really dramatic impact on many people's lives. And just to be clear, I know most of you out there are not here to hear me talk about geopolitics in any way, but I do think that there are a number of implications that this war has on not only society, economy, things like that, various industries, but on the gaming industry in particular. So today I wanted to focus on that aspect of the war, basically impact of the Russia-Ukraine war to game development and with more of a focus on mobile free to play because that's the industry that I'm focused in. But to help us understand this situation and a lot of the implications, especially to those companies in Russia and the Ukraine, we have with us today Boris Kalmykov. Did I pronounce your last name
Wow,
properly, Boris?
that's actually very good. I'm
Okay.
surprised, but that's very good. Yeah.
CEO of Hypemasters. And Boris, just to give us a little bit of your background and to provide a little bit of street cred for you and to allow the audience to understand why you have a particular insight into Russia and Ukraine. Could you tell us a little bit more about your background and kind of your company, Hypemasters?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, I actually like to thank you, Joe, for inviting me and speaking about this topic. I know it's going to be probably very controversial and probably going to have a lot of comments, but I think it's important to cover it. I think it's important to kind of share like what people are going through and talk about it
Right,
openly instead of the backstages or back doors where people are just whispering about it. It's really cool to
right.
kind of face it face to face the issue. And yeah, if we talk about me, I'm ethnically Russian, so I was born in Moscow. But then when I was around 10 years old, I moved to the UK. So right now I live in the UK, in Hampshire, actually in Lymington, which is a small, sea town.
Not to
And
be
yeah,
confused with Leamington Spa, right?
no, not to be confused with Lymington Spa,
That's
which
right.
is a different, it's
Right.
different area, different county. I'm in Hampshire in Lymington. Yeah. Cool, which is next to Isle of Wight. And yeah, my career kind of started far away from gaming, actually after university, where I studied international relations, which is kind of the topic which we're discussing. I
Mhm.
went to Goldman Sachs, and I was an analyst there for interest rate trade derivatives, which is like super far from gaming. But then I got at one day, I knew this wasn't for me, and I got a report about wargaming and how much money they're making. How big of a studio they are, how big of a business they are. I actually understood that gaming can be a good business, and it really struck me because I'm a passionate gamer from early days in Russia, where my neighborhood was super tough, and the only thing I could do really safely is to play games. So I was a
Mm.
World of Warcraft fan, and all the RTS fan. Like I played StarCraft and Command and Conquer, Red Alert. So this is kind of my childhood. And yeah, then I just moved into games. I started my career at Unity, where I was helping devs with monetization and analytics efforts. I worked with companies like Playrix, Rovio, Wargaming, all the major European guys actually, helping them use Unity tools. And then I was doing a little bit of the same in Facebook, kind of being one of their first like kind of gaming oriented salespeople. And from then I started Hypemasters. And Hypemasters is a studio which basically brings in all my aspirations in games. We are here to build legendary and genre-defining games that players all over the world can play for years. I know that might sound familiar, but this is the stuff that I'm actually excited about. I really want to build a studio that is purposefully doing that. And in terms of the composition, Hype Masters is around 30 people right now, and we are building a classic RTS for mobile, which you have seen, last week at GDC. I've shown you, and yeah, and in terms of
Looks great,
where.
by the way.
Thank you, thank you. I'm keen to share with anyone who wants it, so please put it in your comment. Like if you want a copy, I'll send you a test flight so you can have a play. But yeah, we are. The thing about our studio is that obviously I've told you that I live in the UK, but 80% of our people actually were based in Russia until recently. So we are touched by this crisis quite heavily. And yeah, I want to share a little bit about it.
Right. And you also have investment from Russian companies, right, or publishers.
We not as of now. We
Oh,
actually,
okay, okay,
yeah, we are funded by one VC is from US, the other one is from Cyprus, which is linked to Russia, but again, it's legally a Cyprus company.
got it. Okay,
The other one is Turkish, and the other one is
okay,
Finnish. So we have a good
got it.
composition of worldwide. Yeah.
Okay. So getting into like the impact. So you mentioned 80% of your company is in Russia. Can you speak to like in terms of like your company, your situation, your employees, what has the impact of the war been and how what, and also just kind of like what is their mindset right now? How are they thinking? Is this I can't imagine it's easy for anybody, but it'd be great
No.
to get like, firsthand account of like how this is impacting people.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say that if we talk about toughness, I think it's the toughest on Ukrainian studios. You know, I have a lot of friends who
Sure.
run businesses in Ukraine studios, like they are, we share the same investors, etc. So they literally continue developing games whilst being bombarded, which is pretty
Right.
incredible. So none of what I'm going to say about my studio compares to that. This is like physical danger. For us, it's
Right.
more about psychology and fears and some economic impact. So in terms of our studio, well, obviously no one has expected anything like this to happen. Literally, like I was
Right.
visiting St. Petersburg in February, I was reading Bloomberg, and I was like, this is nuts. Like nothing like this would ever happen. Like Russia is not the kind of state that would invade other states so openly. But then it did happen, and in the first week, we had already one person leaving Russia for Turkey, kind of saying that he's fearful and he's anxious, and that basically spread around really quickly. So I would say that majority of like our team is really anxious and fears about the future, their relatives, and their and again another one, the big one is the perception of Russians. You know, like
Right.
it's all about we keep hearing in the news that there's this culture of cancellation where basically a Russian equals aggressor equals Putin kind of thing, and that's the kind of the
Right.
major fear is that we're so far away from it as game developers, like literally until like a month ago I have never been reading politics for like since my degree. So now I'm kind of doing
Right.
the same. I'm constantly reading about politics, and
Right.
for my team, it's a lot of anxiety. It's a lot of kind of uncertainty. Thankfully, like for our company, we've been able to support the team. We've been able to pay them. We've been able to help them with relocation. But that's not every studio can afford that, I would say,
Right.
and we've been pretty lucky since we just have this connection with the West. But yeah, it's tough, and most of it is psychological. Most of it is fears, and most of it is perception of their future and perception of the future for them being Russian in this world. Yeah.
Right. In terms of like the employees that you said were in Russia, you helped relocate them. How many did opt for that option of relocating, and where did they go?
Yeah, so we have around 50% of our studio out of Russia right now. So,
Okay.
we have, I've just, I'm sitting in the room, in a conference room where I've met with my guys in Turkey, in Istanbul, and we had like 9 people here today with me. Um,
Okay.
we have more people in Armenia and Georgia. So these are the countries where actually a lot of the Russians moved to, because these were the countries that were still open for kind of to go to. As you know, like a lot of the air traffic has been stopped between Russia and Europe. So there are no planes for flying between Russia and, let's say, UK or Spain or somewhere. So people
Oh,
had limited choices in terms of where they could go. They could either go to Asia, which is less politicized right now. Like
yeah.
they could go to Malaysia or to Dubai, or they could go closer to Armenia, Georgia, or Turkey. And obviously, our team has decided closer because it's closer to their relatives, closer to me as a founder. I could visit them quite easily in these countries. Um, that's the situation, and that's
Right.
what's happening to a lot of studios. You could see that. I've been speaking to a lot of the developers, a lot of founders, and that's what happens to everyone right now. Like a lot of their people are in these 3 countries, kind of concentrated there,
Right.
and
And
continuing to work
in
from these countries.
Got it. And Boris, for those Russian employees who did choose to relocate, what's the motivation behind moving out of Russia? I mean, obviously, it's not like they're the ones starting the war, but is it because of sanctions? Is it because of the potential to get, maybe get enlisted into a war or something like that? Or what's the primary motivation?
Sure. The primary motivation is a total uncertainty. So, as I
Okay,
said before, no one actually was expecting this war to happen. So, when it
right.
hit, it kind of switched on the mindset. Oh, anything can happen in this world, you know. So
I
all the
see.
potential fears kind of
Yeah,
went blue. So, oh, can I get conscripted? Yeah, sure. And the
right,
government wasn't giving any good signs. Like we had, some of the MPs in Russia, which is like a congressman in the U.S. They were basically suggesting that anyone who protests the war would go to the front lines to Donbass, and this is pretty rough. Like
mhm, yeah,
if you consider what's happening, and so the primary motivation was major uncertainty and fear of physical. Um, Either punishment or fear of not being able to choose what you do.
right,
But for some people, actually, apart from that, like primary motivation of just to survive and continue living a normal life, it
got
was
it.
also about like comfort of living because a lot of the Western companies have been leaving Russia or um, all the major services actually linked to game development have not been able to continue operating. Like if we talk
Right,
about Adobe, like Photoshop, the tool that every artist uses pretty much, or
yeah,
if we talk about JetBrains and Writer, like also used by a lot of the developers, these companies have just not been able to continue offering licenses to Russian companies, and that
right.
gives a lot of problems. You could VPN it, like a lot of the people are doing in China, but that's
Uh-huh.
a lot of hassle. And if you also add to the fact that a lot of chip processors like AMD and Intel, they've stopped shipping stuff to Russia, and Samsung has stopped shipping phones.
Oh, wow.
We are developers, so we need test phones, we
Right,
need we need computers, and all of this
right.
is like it's basically less available right now. So to
I
continue
see.
operating as a studio, it just becomes tougher. Obviously, with time, everything will readjust, and these products will flow through third countries like Kazakhstan, for example. I can see a lot
Mhm.
of this happening, but it's just going to be harder, more expensive, and yeah, a lot more hectic. Yeah, than
Right,
let's say if we were to be located in the Netherlands, for example.
right. And to your point about you mentioned there are some Russians anyway are concerned about the perception about them as people. I will say so. We actually at Lila we employ one person in Russia, and we have a number of open job roles. And when I talked to him once, and he was like, "Yeah, the I know some folks here, but they're Russian." So I'm like, "What are you talking about?" I mean,
Yeah,
I love people. I love Russians.
yeah.
And so I think, yeah, to your point, there may be a little bit of a perception that there's a stigma to Russian people. And I really hope they understand that, at least for someone like myself. I mean, I view people as people. And I think, my assumption would be the vast majority of the world thinks that way, or that's my hope that's how most people would think. But yeah, I do think that that's unfortunate that there may be, to your point, some people who think that there are some biases that people have, or even like resentment or something. Whereas, at least speaking for myself and for a lot of the people at our company, we just think about people as people.
Yeah, that's I think a really big takeaway from this podcast. I think that's how it should continue. Like with
Right.
especially our industry, we're quite a young industry, and we're quite a liberal industry, and I think it should be like this.
Yeah.
Ukrainians, Russians, Belarusians. I don't see a problem with people working together even after this drastic events. But people are people at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm like we're crazy bastards. I tried to actually get some people from Pakistan to move to India too, but that didn't quite work out. But yeah, so maybe like one other question I could ask before I ask about specific companies, more famous companies or bigger
Hmm.
companies that have been impacted by this, is when you think about Russia and Ukraine, what are the types of when thinking about the game industry, certainly there are certain regions that are really great at specific areas. LATAM has great artists, for example.
Hmm.
Canada has great, more like AAA, like high fidelity type of expertise. But when you think about Russia and Ukraine, what types of talent do you typically see? And my perception is like someone who doesn't know that much, but I generally think about like shooters or war type of games. So probably like
Kind of a
netcode
game
and
we're
kind of like
developing.
a
Yeah.
PvP. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, could you speak to that in terms of like tendencies of the talent in Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah, actually, when I was preparing for our chat, I was thinking that, oh, it's mobile, free to play, because we have Playrix, we have a lot of talent from Plarium, we
Right.
have Nexters, Mytona, Melsoft, all these
Yep.
famous studios. But then I remembered, oh, Escape from Tarkov as well is from Russia. Oh,
Yeah.
Wargaming is also
Yeah.
from,
Battle State. Yep.
Belarus. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So it's actually the talent is quite widespread, and when I think about like the core competencies, I would say the dev talent is definitely the developers, the Unity developers or Unreal developers, the guys who code is the
Right.
resource that a lot of the companies. Even when I was working at Facebook, you would see like a WhatsApp team consisting like 50% of Russian people.
Yeah.
So is the developers is the major talent, and I think that's why if we talk about talent and shooter games and war games and multiplayer games, these are, I would say, tougher games to make, simply because multiplayer,
Right.
it requires really good ping, it requires really good server connection. That's the strength, and the strength comes from the fact that still, if we look at USSR, there was a really strong mathematical school
Yes.
in the region. There were a lot of scientists, physicists, and a lot of the companies actually sprawled
Yeah.
from it. If we talk about
And
the
everybody
biggest,
plays chess.
that's a misconception. Although when I was at
Is
school, I was
it?
playing a lot
Okay.
of chess. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was trying to follow the stereotypes, and when I was in the UK school, I joined the chess club, and yeah, I was trying to be Russian.
Okay.
um, uh, yeah, I mean, like from these technical schools, we had, there's a big company called Yandex. It's basically Google for Russia. The guys
Mhm.
went from the physics school near physics university near Moscow, and that's where the talent is. Right now, there are also a lot of growing talents in game design and art as well. Like there are a lot of outsourced studios in Ukraine, in Russia, who are serving major AAA developers like EA or Riot or who you name it. I've seen a lot of artists working for these bigger companies.
Right. And so maybe now shifting to like these big companies, you mentioned a few of them, Playrix, Plarium, and
Hmm.
certainly some of these companies have, I imagine, employees in both countries. So you got to imagine that's a really, really challenging situation. My belief would be that these companies that are in both geographies would naturally be seriously impacted. But um,
Yeah.
what have you heard, or how do you think these companies are being impacted?
Yeah, so just a disclaimer, I'm not linked to this company, so I'm just gonna talk rumors, which is what this is
I
about.
love rumors.
Yeah, this is all about rumors, right? So nothing factual, just
Sure.
rumors.
Right.
But any big company is actually linked to all three countries, right? Wargaming has huge offices in Minsk, in Kiev, and in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Playrix is the same. From what I heard, they have like 1,500 employees in Ukraine, 1,500
Mhm.
in Russia, few hundred in Belarus. So all these companies actually draw from talent pools in all these countries. And so far from what I've been hearing, well, firstly, all these companies are trying to help and relocate as many people as they can. There are restrictions to what they can do, obviously, because in Ukraine, if you are a man, you cannot leave the country. You have to stay,
Right.
and because it's literally military mobilization there. Um, but women and children can leave, and I think that's where these companies are helping the most. So there's a lot of effort, and I think the whole region is kind of concentrated on helping their people, which is really cool to see. Everyone
Right,
goes back to basics. We're human. We should, work this out. We should,
right,
leave this. But obviously, on the rumor side, obviously there's a lot of pressure. Because if you're a Ukrainian being bombarded, it's the worst situation that could have been
yeah, it's highly
happening to you
emotional.
and your life. Yeah,
Yeah,
super emotional. And I see a lot of my even friends and people who I follow on like Facebook and Instagram, they get super emotional. They post every day about the situation, and I totally can understand that. And obviously, they are putting a lot of pressure on their executives to kind of speak up against the war and speak up
right,
against what's happening. I think it's fair that they're doing it, but at the other end, if executives speak up, they put in danger all the thousands of employees in Russia
right,
because
yeah,
imagine if you're a Playrix and you speak up and you have 2,000 people there, and the government has
yeah,
been unpredictable by this point. Like we
right,
do not know what to expect. We don't know whether to expect support or something else. Like
right.
so
And
they don't want
and
to risk
certainly
it.
like right, and certainly a lot of the employees in Russia, through no fault of their own, or even us in the US, what we hear in terms of the media and what's actually going on, I mean, everyone is living in a different kind of context of what right versus wrong is. And and so you could have very divergent opinions through no one's, I would say no one's particular fault, just because of like what you're hearing and how you're understanding the situation, which may come from a completely different context. Whether and that, and I think that's one of the faults that we have in the West is we have like this very Western, like, no, this is the right way, this is exactly how it should be. But I think we should also understand that different people in different countries with different contexts might have different opinions, and
Yeah.
then in a war case, things could get very emotional.
Things
And so
get
I
very
could just
emotional.
imagine
There's a lot of propaganda on every single side, and
every
as far
side. That's
yeah,
that's right.
and as far as a business person, an entrepreneur, I just wrote a piece about it today about my principles of crisis management. I try to stay
Okay.
apolitical. I do not judge any side simply because I do not know the
Good.
facts. I'm not on the
Right.
ground. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to help my people to get out of
Right.
any situation they are in. And I think that's what like a lot of these big companies are taking. But yeah, it's increasingly difficult, and I can
Right.
imagine like people privately being very political about about what's happening, and obviously that creates internal divisions in studios or between people or between teams. But hey,
Right. And just for the
yeah,
audience, I'll put a link to to the paper that you wrote, or the post
yeah,
that you wrote in the show notes. So if you're in the audience, be sure to check that out. I will definitely read it as well myself.
it's in English as well. It's my first piece in English. I've
Good.
been writing in
That
Russian
helps.
before. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, cool. So I think in terms of like other impacts, I thought we could talk about some of the other potential disruptions. We certainly have sanctions. It was really difficult. And by the way, thank you so much, Boris. So at Lila, we do have someone in Russia. It was a pain in the ass to try to get him paid. Right? It's like, no, this bank doesn't work. This bank doesn't work. This bank doesn't work. He's like, ah.
Has it worked for you
But
now?
yeah, it did. Yeah, I was able to get it through. But
That's amazing.
and and yeah, and again, thank you so much for for helping me out and giving me advice and stuff like that. But in terms of like potential disruptions, and we have the current sanctions that you mentioned already in terms of like certain chips not being sent to Russia, maybe the inability to access equipment in Russia. But and just to be clear, I'm like you. I try to be apolitical. I try to not have an opinion on sanctions or not. But I mean, these are real. So could you talk more about like some of the potential impacts in terms of if the war gets drawn out? What do you think could happen in terms of whether it's additional disruptions or additional sanctions? And how do you think this plays out? And by the way, just for the audience, I think that at least from my side, and I'm not even, in Russia. We have, one kind of person working with us in Russia, but like, I tried to apply for a Silicon Valley bank account application, and they were like all these. I was like, "What is this?" Like all this disclosure. Who are all my stakeholders? Are they related to Russia? And I'm just like, "Oh my god!" It's
Yeah.
like all this paperwork, all this stuff. So you could tell, like a lot of the banks are really like getting laser focused in on the sanction stuff, and so I'm just a little bit concerned about where this could potentially go. But I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Boris?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of sanctions, obviously, the biggest sector that has been hit is banking.
Mhm.
And we've talked a little bit about it, but I just want to expand a little bit further as well because it's
Sure.
actually a huge problem. You know, as far as sanctions go, actually only a few entities are sanctioned, but a lot of the banks have been quite liberal in terms of stopping all transactions with Russia.
Right.
Simply for reasons that I do not understand. Maybe they don't have a big compliance team. Maybe they just want to stay out of the region. But even like our bank in the UK, Revolut, it's founded by a Russian guy and a Ukrainian guy, and they stopped all transactions to Russia. And I know they have
Wow.
a team there, a huge team there. It's actually their biggest dev center, as far as I know, um, which is kind of like what is happening, right? So I think it's again for banks. I think it's a lot of uncertainty. It's a lot more work. So that's why they need to make sure that they adhere to sanctions. Otherwise, they might get penalized by the government. And
Mhm.
from my times at Goldman Sachs, I know that especially big banks, they take it very seriously. So any kind of hint towards this being linked to a sanctioned entity will stop trade completely. So I think that's very important. And some banks are still continuing doing business with Russia, and I'm really thankful for that because we can continue operating. um, but yeah, this is kind of the biggest field, and it not only concerns businesses sending money to businesses. It concerns people being able to, withdraw money. So, for example, Visa and Mastercard, they said basically that Russian people cannot use Visa and Mastercard overseas. So, my guys in Turkey, when they came here, they couldn't use their bank cards, which is like
Wow.
crazy. Um, I'm glad that Russia created its own payment system, and it's accepted in Turkey, which is like a miracle, that it actually happened.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, this is like the biggest thing. I would say the other major thing with regards to sanctions, it's linked closer to risks. And people being more cautious. Actually, again, all this chips being withdrawn, it's nothing to do with sanctions. It's companies taking a position. um, so they just want to disassociate themselves with the market, with the government. They don't want to be present there for this or that reason. Maybe they have logistical issues, like some car automakers. They didn't stop because they were sanctioned or they wanted to stop business, but it's just because it became increasingly difficult logistically to send their products. um, I think it's a lot more like what we when we talk about sanctions, it's actually a lot more about risks. Risks for your business, risks for you dealing with the Russian, and you like people and companies being cautious. Let's take an example of, like, let's say an investor, a VC looking to invest in a gaming studio. One of the risks that they have to consider now is whether the company has a risk of the majority of their developers being shut down in the
Right.
country, similar to North Korea.
Right.
And that's kind of what stops a lot of the deals right now. I hear in the industry is that because Ukraine and Russia, there's a war, there's so much uncertainty, and they just don't want to associate themselves and putting themselves into the risk where you put 10 million in a company and it cannot operate for a year, let's say, or
Right.
it has to spend like half of this money on relocating people. Um, this is kind of the major thing in terms of sanctions and effects of the whole like community um, being like withdrawing from Russia. Mm, Obviously, that's kind of in terms of where I see this is going. Um, I'm an optimist by nature. I think,
Good.
as an entrepreneur, you have to be an optimist. Otherwise, why the hell do you
Yes.
start a business? you
Right.
know, you would think it would
I
shut down
agree.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I'm an optimist, and I think, hopefully this conflict will be over soon. And as far as I see, I think a lot of the companies gradually will start coming back. But I think a lot of the people are still going to be concerned about Russian government and its leadership, and it's going to be a slow process. It's not going to be like instantaneous. Ah, okay, Russia stopped war. Let's go back. It's going to be like step by step, going back into the market. And by the time it happens, you'll have a whole load of Chinese companies invading Russian market, because that's what literally the Chinese ambassador in Moscow said. Hey, Chinese entrepreneurs, there's so much opportunity. Look at these companies withdrawing. Like, open up now. you know. Um, so it potentially, it's going to be a different world right now, where Russia's, its focus is definitely going to be more to the east for at least a few years, and um, that's going to be like another country completely. Before that, it was really Western. If you visit Moscow and St. Petersburg, it's really developed, really Western.
Right.
Now it's probably going to be a lot more, think people like losing their jobs, things shutting down, and then new economy emerging from like different areas of the world.
Right. And speaking to your point about like businesses exiting and maybe some Chinese entrepreneurs trying to move in and things like that. One of the topics that has come up from time to time, especially when Trump was president in the US, was this notion of splinternet, meaning, that there would be kind of a geographical kind of geographical kind of separation where for example in India a number of Chinese games and apps have been blocked, including like Green Free Fire, PUBG was blocked. In China, a lot of U.S. games and apps are blocked. In if sanctions go further, um, do you have any specific thoughts in terms of Splinternet? Do you think it happens? Does that open up opportunities for game developers in any way? And we have seen that, to your point about voluntary kind of sanctions, we have seen a number of game companies that have kind of exited, right? Like or have kind of stopped their games being distributed in Russia. But wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So, in a sense, Splinternet has been happening in Russia for a bit now, right? So, I've
Mhm.
mentioned there's local Google, which is Yandex, and it's actually
Right.
quite a powerful engine, and it really rivals Google in the market. And
Okay.
this particular company, Yandex, they have their own taxi services. They actually acquired Uber, local Uber, which is funny. Usually, Uber is the one acquiring companies.
Right.
So in Russia, Splinternet has existed for a bit, not to the same sense as China, but I think it might move towards the same direction where like content will be needed to be approved by the government, and I can totally see it happening. To be honest with you. Um, and in terms of the opportunities for developers, I think. To be honest with you, Russia is a much smaller market than China, and Splinternet can only work only to a point, right? It
Yeah.
cannot be to the same magnitude. You can't have Tencent growing out of Russia market because it's simply much smaller. Um, you can have local companies like creating games for local communities, and there are some big gaming companies again which have like their biggest audiences in Russia, like for example Wargaming and World of Tanks. This is a good example of a company that basically exists in the Russian market, and is this is their main audience, and this is their main paying audience. um, but it can only go so far. It's not. It's never going to be the same, as big as China, and for some of the companies, it's never going to create the same, economics. You wouldn't have a possibility to build the same kind of services. For example, like you probably won't have the local messenger. It will never become like super popular.
Right.
Like WeChat, right? You have Telegram, which is also created by a Russian dude, Pavel Durov, but he is a much more like he's an international guy now. Like I think he lives in Dubai, and he's been running company outside of Russia for a long time now. So there's definitely going to be a lot less opportunity. Um,
Right.
there
And
are definitely going to be companies. I don't know whether you've heard, but Sberbank, like the biggest bank in Russia, they've launched their gaming division and they are focusing on a
okay.
particular market, Russian market. Um,
Okay.
so they're definitely going to move in, but
Yeah.
I don't imagine it to be huge.
Right. Although I would say like maybe the flip side of the Splinternet is like Russian companies going out. But I mean, to the point about maybe from a legal entity perspective, there might be like Russian companies that are either organized in like Ireland or Cyprus or something like that.
I would
So
say 90% of Russian companies are organized in this way already. So
okay, so
y-
there may be some issues about blocking the quote unquote Russian company because they may be organized somewhere else, but that would probably, to your point, it probably be that would be the bigger impact if there was a splinter net, if those companies were blocked from exporting to other markets rather than kind of importing it into Russia.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, to this point, like, majority of the companies who are operating globally, they have headquarters elsewhere. Like, they don't have headquarters
Right.
in Russia. And this happens because, there are certain laws in Russia which literally prevent you from operating on a global scale. Like, for example, there was a VAT on doing UA. So if you want to spend a marketing dollar on Facebook,
Ooh,
you'd have to pay 20% to the government, which is nonsense,
wow.
given the economies of free to
Yeah,
play. So that's why a lot of the companies have already moved out, like
got it.
before. And to the point of, even if these companies have headquarters elsewhere, they still might be banned from operating in the West. Totally. You've seen, Nexters, a big company with their title Hero Wars. They had a SPAC IPO last year. And they
Mhm.
were delisted recently, even though like they have a lot of the presence in Cyprus, which is
Right,
part of European Union. Yeah, so I think for a lot
right,
of the companies now it's kind of a strategic initiative to move a lot of their people to other countries, so the exposure to Russia or being tagged as Russian is reduced.
right. Yeah, I mean, similar to like C getting blocked from India, even though they're not really a Chinese company, but
Yeah,
they had some investment from Tencent, and it's like, oh, we're gonna block them anyway. But
yeah, yeah, yeah. This can happen.
okay, so maybe like a final set of questions I could ask you is more about like the future outlook, and certainly like the war's continuing, and I totally agree with you. I hate war, love people. Hopefully, this thing resolves soon. But in terms of like the potential implications and fallout, just from what we've already seen, how do you think about? Well, maybe we could start with like the people. Like,
Hmm.
given all that's happened, like, and people already being, even if you move them to, let's say, Istanbul or somewhere in Turkey or wherever, like if you brought Russians and Ukrainians together, what is where are people's minds at? Like, is there going to be some and again, completely understood, but like, if would there be the potential for them to work together, or how do you view that, just given what's happened?
I've been actually interviewing a Ukrainian guy today who is right now
Okay,
involved in Lvov, and he knows that like 80% of our guys are are Russian. So actually,
okay,
I don't think there is I don't think there's obviously going to be extremes, right? There's always
sure,
going to be people on the extreme side of things, but I don't see, given that game dev is a liberal community,
right,
against usually against the war, usually up for making games that might be about war, but this is better play than do. um, I don't think there's going to be a lot of problems in that sense. Obviously,
right,
Ukrainian people are not going to probably go to live in Russia, and
sure,
vice
yeah,
versa. I think that's going to be
right,
kind of impossible, given that
right,
apart from game development community, there's a whole bunch of people who, for example, support war for some reason or another. Um,
right,
and I think this like intermingling between nations is definitely going to be put on hold, unfortunately. And this is really sad because I know a lot of businesses have close links. We all have relatives. Like I'm part Belarusian ethnically. I have some Bulgarian blood in me. So I have some Finnish blood in me. This region is really interlinked.
Right.
and it's gonna stop. It's not gonna be the same way for I would say many years. It's gonna be a slow process of rebuilding trust, if ever it will be rebuilt. But it's a possibility that Russians and Ukrainians work together, in a location like Istanbul or Czech Republic or London, and that's what's already happening, right? And when we meet there, we all know we are people. We have the same goals. Uh, People are people, as you say.
Right.
So that's kind of where I see the industry going. Like obviously, with companies putting their strategic efforts into opening offices somewhere in Europe, uh, they would transfer people from Ukraine and from Russia to these locations, and I think people will be happy working with each other. This is this is basic humanity. We're not gonna. I don't believe that people will hold a grudge or like go against one another, saying, "Oh, you're a bastard," or
Right.
"You're a bastard."
Right. Yeah, I am with you, and I have the very same hopes that people can see through all that stuff and basically treat each other humanely. But
Yeah.
so maybe the last question I have is like, given all that's happened, in terms of the future outlook for game development in Russia, in the Ukraine, is it going to disperse out to other countries like Turkey, Poland, wherever, or how do you see the general outlook from your perspective?
There are two scenarios that can happen. I would
Mhm.
say. First scenario is that there is a government change in Russia, and then everything changes drastically once again, and
Okay.
perception of Russia changes in the world. That's always a possibility, although I would say it's quite low percentage given the amount of security the government has and the amount of support it has by the people.
Mhm.
The second possibility is the realistic one, 97%, is that all these
Mhm.
companies who can afford it will move out and will continue operating on a much more global scale. So if you
I
take
see.
my studio, for example, I was planning to make it international with our Series B, to open offices in Europe, in America, because I realized that there is a power in terms of cultural interaction, people from different backgrounds interacting with each other and creating something beautiful. Um, has to be fast forwarded. this has to this has to happen now, not in my lofty future dreams where we have like already
Right.
few life games in production. Uh,
Right.
so this is what's going to happen. I think a lot of the studios are going to centrally relocate, because so far it has been kind of more like financial support. So if you feel that you're uncomfortable, we would give you money to kind of relocate to a place where you feel more comfortable. Whereas if you look into the strategic aspects of it, is that yes, studios are looking into where is it good to establish a permanent presence. Where can we get people to apply for visas? Where is it cost effective to hold the majority of people? Where is it cost effective to kind of hold the executive level, etc., etc. So this is the
Right.
questions that every single executive is asking themselves, and I've been speaking to a lot of them recently. Um, and this is what's on our minds. It's like, okay, where is now a permanent base for Hypemasters, for other
Right.
companies? Yeah, this is our future. Where I think a lot of the people are gonna be less associated with Russia, unfortunately.
Got it. Okay, well, for our audience, you heard Boris. If you are in Russia or the Ukraine, please do apply. I'll leave Boris's contact information in the show notes. And for anyone out there in Russia or Ukraine, if you want to come work for our FPS shooter company in India, you can contact me. But I think that's all the questions I have, Boris. If do you have any sort of like final message or any other thoughts to tell the audience?
My final message is just, if you're an executive, please continue to support your people in need, to assist with relocation and payments. And, if you're an investor, do not cancel on deals or, unfollow on what you have promised to your companies. Things are going to
Yeah,
work out. Things are going to get back to normal, because they always do. Like war has never been, a persistent mode of people. It's war, peace, war, peace. And hopefully peace will be achieved soon, and continue to be a person, a kind person, a good person, no matter who you're facing. And yeah, talent is hard to come by nowadays, and it's important to realize that preserving this talent is important like never before. And if you have Russian employees, if you have Ukrainian employees and Belarusian employees, try to keep them and try to help them.
Right. Okay, Boris, thank you so much for all of your insights, all of your thoughts. I definitely wish you great luck on your game. From what I saw, it looked really good. And so, with that, to our audience, we'll catch you next time. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye bye.